The alien scanners screamed lethal toxin detected. The guards drew their weapons. The ambassador prepared to die. But General Vance just smiled, poured the red liquid over his food, and said, finally, some flavor. To the galaxy, it was a Class A chemical weapon. To the human, it was just hot sauce. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was usually the quietest place in the universe. It was a beautiful room with white walls, soft lights, and rounded furniture. There were no sharp edges anywhere because the council species were fragile and peaceful. But today, the silence felt heavy. Ambassador Zal stood by the long dining table and wiped sweat from his blue forehead. He was a Galaxian, a species known for being tall, thin, and very easily frightened. He checked his uniform 3 times. He looked at the door. He was terrified. Today was a historic day. It was the first time a human was coming to eat dinner with the council. Zal looked at his security guards. They were large aliens with thick shells, but even they looked nervous. Everyone had heard the stories about the humans. They came from Earth, a planet the council called a Class 10 Deathworld. The gravity on Earth was strong enough to crush a Galaxian flat. The sun was full of radiation. The air was full of dangerous bacteria. And yet, the humans survived there. They did not just survive, they thrived. Zal had read the files. Humans drank mild poisons for fun and played sports that resulted in broken bones. Now, one of them was coming here, into this fragile room. Suddenly, the heavy metal doors of the hall groaned. A loud, rhythmic thumping sound echoed on the floor. Thud. 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 It was the sound of heavy boots. General Vance walked into the room. He did not look like a monster, but he felt like one. He was shorter than Zal, but he was twice as wide. His green military uniform was tight against his chest. He looked dense and solid, like a walking stone. He had a square jaw and short gray hair. His eyes scanned the room like a predator looking for prey. Ambassador Zal, the general shouted. His voice was incredibly loud. It boomed off the walls and made Zal's sensitive ears ring. The human walked forward quickly. He moved with a scary amount of energy. Before Zal could bow, General Vance grabbed Zal's long, thin hand. The general squeezed it. It was a handshake, a common greeting on Earth. But to Zal, it felt like his hand was caught in a hydraulic press. He felt his delicate bones grinding together. Zal tried not to scream. It is a pleasure, Zal whispered weakly, pulling his hand back carefully. The general laughed, a barking sound that made Zal flinch. Great to be here. I'm starving, Vance said. He pulled out a heavy chair. The council had to reinforce the chair with steel beams because normal alien chairs would break under the weight of a human. Vance sat down heavily. The floor seemed to shake. Zal sat on the other side of the table, as far away as possible. He pulled out a small device from his pocket. It was a bioscanner. He wanted to make sure the environment was safe for the guest, but mostly, he wanted to make sure the guest was safe for him. I hope you don't mind, General Vance said, reaching into his pocket. I sent some special requests to your kitchen staff. Just some simple comfort food from my home. He placed a menu on the table. Zal smiled politely, but under the table, he pointed his scanner at the menu. The machine started to work. It analyzed the chemical composition of the requested items. Suddenly, the scanner started to vibrate. A red light flashed silently on the screen. Zal looked down at the data. His eyes went wide with horror. The text on the screen was bright red. It read, "Warning, lethal toxins detected. Warning, chemical warfare agents." Zal looked at the list again. The human had asked for ethanol and capsaicin. To the innocent aliens, these were industrial cleaning chemicals and nerve agents. Zal looked up at General Vance. The human was tucking a napkin into his shirt and smiling happily. Zal felt his stomach turn. He realized that for a human, a deadly chemical attack was just a dinner request. Zal gripped the table and prepared for the worst meal of his life. The mood in the room shifted from nervous to terrified when a robotic server rolled into the grand hall. The robot carried a silver tray, and on the tray sat a square glass bottle. Inside the bottle was a dark, amber-colored liquid. To General Vance, this was a very expensive bottle of Earth whiskey, aged for 30 years. But to Ambassador Zal, the liquid looked suspicious. It moved slowly inside the bottle, like oil. The robot placed the tray on the table. General Vance clapped his heavy hands together again, making Zal jump in his seat. The human reached out and grabbed the bottle by the neck. He looked at the label and smiled a wide, predatory smile. "Now, this is the good stuff," Vance announced. He pulled the cork out of the bottle with a loud pop. Instantly, a strong, sharp smell filled the air. Zal covered his nose. The smell was stinging and chemical. It reminded Zal of the engine room on his spaceship. It smelled like fuel. Zal glanced at his scanner under the table. The numbers were scrolling fast. The device identified the main ingredient immediately, ethanol. Zal felt his blood run cold. Ethanol was a powerful solvent. The Galaxian people used it to strip paint off old buildings. If a Galaxian touched it, their skin would blister. If they drank it, their internal organs would shut down in minutes. The general picked up a small glass. He poured the amber poison until the glass was half full. The liquid swirled around. "You sure you don't want a drop, Ambassador?" Vance asked, holding the bottle toward the blue alien. Zal shook his head violently. He pushed his chair back a few inches. He did not even want to be near the fumes. I am allergic to death," Zal stammered quietly. Vance shrugged his massive shoulders. "More for me," the human said. He lifted the glass into the light. The amber liquid shined dangerously. "To friendship between our worlds," General Vance shouted. He raised the glass high. Zal watched in frozen horror. He wanted to shout, to stop the human, to tell him that he was about to drink industrial cleaning fluid. But he could not move. He watched as the general tipped the glass back. The liquid flowed into the human's open mouth. Vance swallowed the entire glass in one go. It was gone. Zal held his breath. He waited for the human to fall over. He waited for the general to choke or for smoke to come out of his ears. For a second, it looked like the poison was working. General Vance squeezed his eyes shut. His face twisted into a grimace. He made a hissing sound through his teeth, like he was in pain. His whole body shuddered. "This is it," Zal thought. "The solvent is burning a hole in his stomach. The diplomatic mission is a disaster." But then, the unthinkable happened. General Vance opened his eyes. He did not fall. He did not die. Instead, he slammed the empty glass down on the table with a loud bang and let out a long breath. "Ah," Vance breathed out. "That burned so good. Very smooth." The human looked refreshed. His eyes were brighter. His cheeks were a little pink, but he was alive. Zal looked at his scanner, then at the human, then back at the scanner. It made no sense. This creature had just consumed enough poison to kill a heavy-duty work beast, and he called it smooth. Zal realized with fear that the human's stomach must be lined with titanium or some other impenetrable metal. Humans were not just strong, they were biologically impossible. The smell arrived before the food did. The kitchen doors slid open, and a thick, heavy scent drifted into the clean air of the grand hall. Ambassador Zal's nose twitched. To a human, the smell was rich, savory, and delicious. It smelled like a summer barbecue. But to Zal and his species, who only ate soft leaves and fruit, the smell was horrific. It smelled like a forest fire mixed with a hospital. It was the smell of burning organic matter. Zal gagged slightly and covered his mouth with a silk napkin. He watched nervously as the robot server approached the table with the main course. The robot moved slowly, as if the plate it carried was very heavy. The robot placed the large white plate in front of General Vance. Zal leaned forward to look, and then he leaned back in shock. On the plate sat a massive, thick slab of meat. It was a ribeye steak, cooked rare. To the general, it was a beautiful dinner. To Zal, it looked like a crime scene. The meat was dark brown on the outside, but the center was still bright red. Steam rose from it, carrying the scent of cooked animal muscle. It sat there, heavy and silent. Zal felt faint. He realized with absolute clarity that this was a piece of a dead beast. The human was not just eating plants, he was eating the body of another creature. General Vance looked at the steak with love in his eyes. "Now that is a beautiful cut," he said softly. Then, the general reached for his utensils. He did not pick up a spoon or a soft fork. He picked up a knife. It was not a normal dining knife. It was a steak knife. The blade was sharp, and it had jagged teeth along the edge. The light caught the metal of the blade. To Zal, this did not look like a tool for eating. It looked like a weapon of war. It looked like a dagger used for combat. Zal trembled. He wondered if the human carried weapons to every meal. The general pinned the meat down with his fork. He pressed the serrated knife into the flesh. He began to saw back and forth. Scritch. Scratch. Scritch. The sound of the sharp metal cutting through the muscle fibers echoed in the quiet room. Zal watched in horror as the knife sliced through the meat. Red liquid oozed out of the steak and pooled on the white plate. Zal thought it was fresh blood. He felt his stomach do a flip. It looked like the general was performing surgery right there on the dinner table. The violence of the action was terrifying. The human was cutting the food with aggressive, strong movements. Finally, Vance cut off a large, triangular piece of the meat. It was dripping with the red juice. He lifted it to his mouth. Zal stopped breathing. He watched the human's jaw open wide. The general placed the flesh into his mouth and bit down. Zal could hear the wet sound of chewing. He saw the muscles in Vance's jaw working hard to crush the dense meat. The general chewed slowly, savoring the flavor. He closed his eyes and hummed a low, happy sound. Perfect. Melts in your mouth, Vance said. Zal stared at the human's teeth. He realized they were not flat like a herbivore's teeth. They were sharp. They were predator teeth. The ambassador realized he was locked in a room with a creature that ate raw flesh for enjoyment. He gripped the edge of the table, praying that the human would not get hungry for something else, like a blue alien. General Vance stopped eating halfway through his meal. He chewed thoughtfully and frowned at the piece of meat on his fork. The silence in the grand hall stretched on. Ambassador Zal watched him closely, hoping that the human was finally full. Zal hoped the terrible meal was over. But the general shook his head with disappointment. "It's good," Vance mumbled to himself, "but it is a little boring. It needs a kick." Zal did not know what a kick was, but it sounded violent. The general reached into the deep pocket of his cargo pants. He pulled out a small, glass bottle. It looked like a vial of potion from a dark laboratory. The label on the bottle was black, and in the center, there was a drawing of a burning human skull. Zal froze. A skull was the universal symbol for death. In every culture in the galaxy, a skull meant, do not touch, or poison. The liquid inside the bottle was a thick, angry red color. It moved slowly, like liquid magma. The general placed the bottle on the white tablecloth. Zal's hand shook as he aimed his scanner at the bottle. The device beeped instantly. It did not need time to analyze. The reading on the screen was flashing purple, which was the color code for biohazard. The scanner identified the substance as pure capsaicin concentrate. To the Galaxian people, capsaicin was not food. It was a Class A neurotoxin. It was a chemical weapon. Zol's people used a very weak version of this chemical in gas grenades to control riots or to stop dangerous criminals. It worked by tricking the brain into thinking the body was on fire. And here was the human, holding a bottle of the pure weaponized toxin at a dinner table. Ghost pepper sauce, Vance read the label out loud. Guarantee to melt your face off. Perfect. The general smiled at the skull picture. He twisted the cap open. The effect was immediate. As soon as the bottle was open, an invisible cloud floated across the table. It was not a smell, it was an attack. The fumes hit Zol's sensitive nose like a physical punch. His eyes instantly filled with water. His throat closed up. He started to cough uncontrollably. Behind him, the two large security guards were also coughing. They rubbed their eyes and stepped back. The air in the grand hall suddenly felt spicy and hot. It was hard to breathe. Zol covered his face with his napkin, trying to filter the air. Chemical leak. Zol wheezed through the napkin. Containment breach. But General Vance did not seem to notice that he was gassing the room. He held the bottle upside down over his steak. He shook it hard. Glug. 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 The thick red sauce poured out. It covered the meat in a pool of red sludge. The smell became stronger, burning the inside of Zol's nose. The human looked at the plate, which now looked like it was covered in blood and fire. There we go, Vance said happily. He cut a piece of the meat, heavily coated in the neurotoxin. Zol peeked over his napkin. He watched with morbid curiosity. He expected the sauce to burn a hole through the general's tongue. He expected the human to scream in agony as the chemical weapon destroyed his mouth. Vance put the food in his mouth. He chewed. The sauce smeared on his lips. To Zol, the human looked like a monster eating fire. The general swallowed. He paused for a moment. Then, he nodded. Now that is spicy, Vance said calmly. He did not scream. He simply prepared another bite. Zol realized that the human was not just immune to poison, he actually enjoyed the sensation of burning. The human was eating pain for flavor. The silence in the grand hall was broken only by the sound of General Vance breathing. Hoo. Ha. Hoo. Ha. The ghost pepper sauce was beginning to work. The chemicals were attacking the human system. Ambassador Zol watched with wide, terrified eyes as the general's body began to change. At first, Vance just stopped chewing. He stared straight ahead at the white wall. Then, a terrifying transformation began. The general's face, which was usually a pale pink color, began to turn red. It started at his neck and moved up to his ears. Within seconds, his entire head was a bright, angry crimson color. To Ambassador Zol, this looked like a severe biological reaction. It looked like the human's blood was boiling inside his veins. Zol glanced at his scanner. The human's body temperature was rising rapidly. His heart rate was climbing. Oh no, Zol whispered. The toxin is spreading. Then came the fluid loss. Large beads of sweat popped out on General Vance's forehead. The water ran down his face like rain. Tears began to stream from his eyes. He squeezed his eyes shut and gripped the edge of the table so hard that the metal groaned. The human opened his mouth and sucked in air loudly, trying to cool his burning tongue. To the aliens, these were the clear signs of a creature in agony. These were the signs of a dying animal. The neurotoxin was melting him from the inside out. Zol could not sit still anymore. He stood up and waved his long, blue arms. Medic! Zol screamed. His voice cracked with panic. Emergency! The human has poisoned himself. Get the antidote kit. Hurry. The security guards panicked. They ran toward the table, but they were too afraid to touch the human. They thought he might explode. Zal reached for the emergency button on the wall to seal the room. Hold on, General. Zal shouted. Help is coming. Do not go into the light. Suddenly, General Vance slammed his hand on the table. Bang! The sound stopped everyone. The guards froze. Zal froze with his finger hovering over the alarm button. They waited for the general to fall over dead. But General Vance did not fall. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He grabbed a napkin and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He wiped the tears from his eyes. Then, he looked at Zal. The redness in his face was still there, but the human was smiling. It was a wide, crazy smile. His eyes looked a little glassy, but he looked incredibly happy. Whoa, Vance said, his voice sounding a little rough. That really clears the sinuses. That has a serious kick to it. He let out a small laugh. I think I'm seeing stars. Fantastic. Zal slowly lowered his hand. He was confused. The human was not dying. In fact, the human looked more alive than before. The pain seemed to give him energy. Zal's scientific mind could not understand it. Why would a biological organism enjoy damage? Why would a creature eat something that made it cry and sweat? You are not in pain? Zal asked, his voice trembling. Oh, it hurts like hell, General Vance admitted cheerfully. He picked up his fork again. But it's a good hurt. It releases endorphins. It makes you feel alive. Zal slumped back into his chair. He looked at the general with a new level of fear. This was the scariest realization of the night. Humans did not just survive on a death world because they were tough. They survived because they were insane. They were monsters who turned pain into pleasure. If a chemical weapon could not stop a human, Zal realized that nothing in the galaxy could. General Vance scraped the last bit of red sauce from his plate with a small piece of meat. He looked very happy. His face was still bright red, and sweat was still dripping down his nose, but he looked satisfied. Across the table, Ambassador Zal was pressing himself against the back of his chair. He was trying to be as far away from the human as possible. Zal watched the fork moving in the general's hand. He felt like he was watching a bomb timer counting down. He just wanted the human to leave so the decontamination team could clean the room. Suddenly, General Vance stopped eating. He looked up and noticed Zal staring at him. Vance looked at the alien's plate. It was still full of safe, green leaves. The general felt bad. He thought he was being rude by eating all the delicious food himself while his host ate nothing. Humans are taught to share, even with aliens. Vance smiled a wide, friendly smile that showed all of his sharp teeth. Hey, Vance said, pointing his fork at Zal. I feel bad eating all of this myself. You haven't touched your food. You must be hungry. Zal shook his head quickly. I am not hungry, he lied. He was actually very hungry, but he was too scared to open his mouth. He was afraid the spicy air would burn his tongue. Vance laughed warmly. He cut a fresh piece of the steak. He dipped it deep into the pool of ghost pepper sauce until it was dripping with the thick red liquid. He held the fork out across the table toward Zal. Come on, buddy. Just try one bite. It is delicious. It opens your eyes. Zal stared at the piece of meat hovering in the air. To him, it looked like a meteor made of lava. The smell of the toxin drifted across the table again. Zal felt his throat tighten. The human was trying to feed him the chemical weapon. No, thank you, Zal whispered, trembling. Don't be shy. Vance insisted, leaning forward. He moved the fork closer to the alien's face. It builds character. It puts hair on your chest. Zal's eyes almost popped out of his head. He did not understand human idioms. He took the words literally. Hair on his chest. Galaxians were smooth, blue-skinned creatures. They did not have hair. They were reptilian. Zal's mind raced with terror. He realized the toxin was not just a poison, it was a mutagen. It would change his DNA. It would grow fur on his body instantly. It would turn him into a monster like the human. The horror was too much. Zal could not be polite anymore. The instinct to survive took over. It is a biological weapon. Zal screamed. He jumped up from his chair so fast that it fell over backward with a loud crash. He is trying to mutate me. Run. Save your DNA. The security guards did not ask questions. They saw their leader panic, so they panicked too. They dropped their laser rifles and turned around. Zal scrambled over the fallen chair. He slipped on the smooth floor but scrambled up on all fours. He ran toward the heavy metal doors like his life depended on it. The guards pushed past him, trying to get out first. Retreat! Retreat, the aliens yelled. They jammed their fingers on the door release button. The doors hissed open, and the aliens fell out into the hallway in a tangled pile of blue limbs. They scrambled to their feet and ran down the corridor, their screams fading away into the distance. The doors slid shut again, locking with a heavy thud. General Vance sat alone in the large, silent room. He held the fork frozen in midair. He blinked. He looked at the empty chairs. He looked at the closed door. He was completely confused. Hair on your chest is just a figure of speech. Vance mumbled to the empty room. It just means it makes you strong. He waited for them to come back, but the room stayed quiet. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner trying to filter out the spicy smell. Vance shrugged his shoulders. He looked at the spicy piece of steak on his fork. It looked too good to waste. Well, Vance said, popping the meat into his mouth. More for me, then. He chewed happily, enjoying the peaceful dinner, wondering why aliens were always so dramatic about good food.